Hello and welcome back to another KCC video. I'm Rob and today we'll be jumping into ProRevenge. Before we start, please hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so you know when the next video goes live. Our first story today comes to us from A Quiet Borderline. Dad helps my friend and me get back at middle school bully, aka why you should never anger a dad who happens to be an engineer. Let's jump right in. This week was our middle school reunion. Most of us went to the same K-8 school, ages 6 to 14 for our friends across the pond. And while we all were laughing and talking over Zoom, my friend, who I'll call Janice, brought up this memory. At our schools, with the exception of kindergarten, 2 grades would be paired together. So, 1st and 2nd grades would be taught together, 3rd and 4th would be taught together, so on and so forth. The 7th and 8th grades had to do a special project every year called Toy Team or TT. Basically, we would be put into teams, build a specific toy that we could market. Representatives from local businesses would be invited to judge our projects and win awards in various categories: best presentation, best design, best research, etc. The idea behind this project was to teach teamwork, ingenuity, creativity, etc. But in the end, it caused more trouble than it was worth, for reasons I'll get to in a moment. I hated Toy Team with a passion, the biggest reason being that the boys would take over the building of the toys and the girls did the secretarial work, listing results, surveying the groups, writing final reports, etc. It wasn't fair, but I was always too afraid to speak my mind and ask to help building, something I've always enjoyed. But 8th grade year was the one that almost broke me because of one kid. Enter Carlos, not his real name. Carlos was in 7th grade but was touted as a math and science genius. He had to go to the local high school to take math and science classes because none of the teachers at our school were qualified to teach at his level. He also prided himself on being a cool kid and had a gang of sycophants follow him around, reaffirming his greatness. In reality, Carlos was a little punk who honestly should have used a lesson or two in the school of hard knocks. He was a jerk to the highest degree, always looked down on everyone else, and since his parents, who were honestly the Malfoys come to life, defended his actions and threatened everyone around them. Because it was a private school and Carlos's parents were big donors, even the teachers were limited in what they could and couldn't do to discipline him. The worst they could do was detention, but he just shrugged it off. Seriously, unless he killed somebody, Carlos was untouchable. Janice and I were thrilled to be in the same group until we learned we'd be paired with Carlos. Carlos immediately took over the project and bossed Janice and me around. Janice and I were favorite targets for Carlos and his sycophants because we were quiet, kept to ourselves, and just focused on our work. Carlos proceeded to make our experience in Toy Team miserable. He claimed that because he was the big math and science expert, only he could build our glider, and we had to write it down. Janice and I put up with it at first because we knew our teachers would do nothing, and it was just an 8-week-long group project. Then, one day, during week 6, it happened. We had to test the gliders. Our testing rig was set up with yardsticks and rubber bands on tables. You'd load the gliders into the rubber bands, pull them back, and launch. Then you'd measure how far they flew and make your corrections. Once again, the boys took over and the girls did the recording. Janice and I were making notes when I noticed the rubber band was about to snap due to how stretched out it was. I warned Carlos about the rubber band and to adjust the glider. When he protested, our teacher, who I'll call Mrs. Adams, snapped at him and told him, "Listen to your partners and adjust." Well, Carlos did as said, but he pulled back the glider too far and too fast. As a result, the rubber band snapped. The rubber band not only slapped Carlos in the face, but broke our glider to pieces because he pulled it back too far and the force hit the fragile wood. Carlos was pissed and turned his anger on me. "No wonder you suck at math and science," he said. This, in addition to all the stuff going on, broke me. It's true that math and science were my worst subjects because I have a learning disability that makes those subjects tough. But I've always loved building and repairing things. My dad is an engineer, and some of my earliest memories were of him teaching me how to fix my toys and encouraging me to experiment with different building things. In addition, I was a total daddy's girl. I wanted to make him proud, and I knew that me being bad at math and science was something that stressed him out. So I'm not joking, I ran away, like in those cliche 90s movies. My house was 2 blocks away and I ran there. Fortunately, my teachers knew that there weren't many places I could have gone and called my mom, who was a stay-at-home mom, to tell her what happened and to please return me to school. What I didn't know was that Dad was working home that day. When I ran in, crying and upset, he noticed and went after me. He calmed me down and asked me what happened. I told him everything about Carlos taking over, about how Janice and I were doing all the hard work, and Carlos being a nasty bully, the rubber band snapping, and me getting blamed. Dad was quietly hugging me, kissing my forehead. When Dad is quiet, that usually means he is angry. When I looked up, I saw that his mouth was set in a hard line, and his eyes were dark. I was scared he was angry at me. I begged him not to be mad at Janice or me because it wasn't our fault. Dad instead reassured me that he wasn't mad at Janice or me. He was mad at Carlos and had an idea to teach that little punk a lesson. Dad then called the school, reassured Mrs. Adams that I was okay and that I would spend the rest of the day at home. He also sent an email to not only Mrs. Adams, but Janice's parents, detailing this plan of his. Janice's parents and Mrs. Adams were game. After we heard it, Janice and I were smiling ear to ear, even though we knew we had to put in the work all by ourselves. The next day, Mrs. Adams pulled Carlos, Janice, and me aside and said, thanks to the glider incident, Carlos was now on his own and had to finish the project by himself. Janice and I would be doing our own project. Carlos was pretty happy about this because those two slowed me down. However, what Carlos was not thinking about was that since Janice and I were doing all the paperwork, we had all the information. We offered to share our notes with him in an attempt to be fair, but he said, it's all in my head and I don't need it to slow me down. In fact, I bet I can do it even better. We all had to sign a contract that information was not exchanged and witnessed by Mrs. Adams. The next 2 weeks were easily the best of toy team for Janice and me. Since we had all of the notes, we were able to rebuild the glider in less than a week. Our dads even set up a makeshift glider range for us to test, and we spent an entire Saturday flying the gliders, one in red, the other in blue, which were the most popular colors according to our surveys. As a result, we improved our glider and even made a game out of it, racing them. When Janice's dad mentioned the red and blue gliders reminded him of the Gemini dueling coaster at Cedar Point, we decided to name the toys after the coaster and make them a 2-for-1. We built the box for our gliders, got our calculations double-checked by not only Mrs. Adams, but 2 independent adults as well. Both dads, who were coworkers, signed off on the math, even adding their proof of work and signing the back. This is important for later. A presentation board with an overview, and along with a huge binder showing all of our work. Janice and I worked really hard on this project, and it felt awesome. On our last day, we had a pizza party and sleepover, making bets on what Carlos's reaction was most likely going to be. Presentation day arrived. This was one of the few days we could wear something else other than our school uniform, so we dressed in nice outfits to make our presentations. Janice and I stood together with our gliders and had big smiles on our faces. We looked at Carlos, who had an actual nice-looking glider, box, presentation board, paperwork, and everything. However, he had an anxious look on his face instead of his usual arrogant and cocky one, which made me happier. Presentation day worked like this. The first half of the day would be the representatives walking around and judging who had the best-looking gliders, boxes, presentation boards, binders, etc. Then we'd have lunch and come back. The ones who had been selected for the second round would then make their presentations to not only the representatives, but the entire class. Janice and I answered the questions asked by the representatives with confident and clear answers. One of the businesses that attended was the engineering firm that our dads worked for. They were impressed with our presentation and selected us for the second round. Carlos was also selected, and he had a worrisome look on his face when the bell rang. After lunch, we returned, and something about the way the binder was sitting made me double check. Wouldn't you know it, the pages with double-checked calculations and proof work were gone. Carlos, being the dick he was, didn't keep notes about his experiments, so he decided to steal our work and present it as his own. Janice and I decided to take a professional approach in order to grind Carlos further into the dirt. I went up to Mrs. Adams and the representatives and asked them if they had gone through our binder while we were gone, because the calculations and proof of work pages were missing. Mrs. Adams was immediately suspicious as well, given Carlos's behavior, and immediately walked over, took his binder off the table, flipped through it, and found the corrections page. He had hastily scrawled in his name at the top next to ours, so it looked like he was involved. Mrs. Adams looked at him and said, "Carlos, why did you take the pages?" Carlos said, "They gave their work to me, remember?" Fortunately, Janice and I included our copy of the signed contract from earlier, saying Carlos had refused use of our information in our binder and pulled it out. At this point, Carlos looked like the kid who denied he had been eating cookies even though he had a ring of crumbs around his lips. "Well, they stole my double-checked work. See? He shows the proof of work our dads had done. I took it out and put it back." Then Janice looked at one of the men, who I learned later was the supervisor of the team both our dads were a part of, and said, "Mr. Lionel, could you please check his proof of work? Our dad signed the back of ours." Mr. Lionel agreed and flipped the page over. Carlos didn't notice that our dads had signed the back of the proof of work and included their names. Mr. Lionel nodded. "I know those signatures anywhere," he said before looking at Carlos with a glare that could wilt a flower. "You told me you wanted to be an engineer someday, right?" Carlos could only nod, his face white. "You are aware that engineers take theft of others' work seriously?" Again, Carlos nodded. "And that if you were doing this in a professional setting, you'd not only be fired from the company, but blackballed from the industry?" Mr. Lionel said, staring down at this kid. Carlos looked like a melted snowman and that he wanted to disappear into the ground. I learned later that Mr. Lionel was a nice man, but man, I could immediately see why our dads respected him in that moment. Mr. Lionel turned to Mrs. Adams. "I recommend that he be disqualified from the next round and be made to apologize to these two girls in addition to returning the proofs to them." Carlos did return the paper and apologized for the theft, not looking me in the eye. As a result, not only was Carlos disqualified, but because he cheated, he flunked the project as a whole. Since Toy Team was at least 30% of our science grade, he ended up getting his first D on his report card, which his parents had a freaking field day with until Mr. Lionel sent them a letter telling them what their son had done and that if he didn't shape up, he risked real trouble in his professional life. Janice and I ultimately won Best Design, but the best award was seeing Carlos's ego get knocked down several pegs. He was still a jerk, but was scared of us. Hey, I might be bad at math and science, but at least I know not to be mean to people who might help me someday. There is a little update to this story as OP has commented down below. It says, "As I mentioned in the original post, I looked up Carlos on Facebook, and it seems he's doing well. Between posting the original and this, I friended him, and we ended up having a really nice chat. He's now happily married with a couple of kids and is finishing his residency in neurosurgery. When I asked him about the Toy Team incident, he did mention that he deserved it, and he started growing up after that. Although we both were laughing at the end of it and have agreed to talk in a few days." This is what I love, a great ProRevenge story of the underdog taking down the bully. But then there's warm and fuzzies later on with them talking to each other many years down the road. It's a wholesome story, and I wish there were more of these on ProRevenge. Thank you to OP for posting in the ProRevenge subreddit. They are linked in the description below. Please go check them out. check out one of these other videos, and if you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories.